Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier, and I'm happy to be here with you today, March 17th of 2022. It's St. Patrick's Day. We hope everyone will enjoy the day, and please be safe, don't drink and drive. Now, we wanted to take a moment to speak with you today because of something that we saw. We had to interrupt our preparations for our interview with Matt Braynard of Look Ahead America, which will be coming out later today. But in the meantime, we saw something that caught our attention. We were thrown off, not just because of the timing of the news that we saw, but some of the information that was being provided to the public in a YouGov poll, a poll that just didn't quite feel right. And we have some questions, and we'll share that with you. But first, we do want to mention, if this is the first time that you are seeing our channel, we welcome you and thank you for being part of our audience. We do long-form political commentary, and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to be able to hear your voice through chats, tweets, and phone calls from anywhere in the world to tell us what you think about the issues that matter and are affecting you. And we do that because we believe in the First Amendment. It's not just an American right, it is a right of everyone in the world, even if your government doesn't agree, even if the internet overlords don't agree. We, every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, want to hear your voice from anywhere in the world. We look forward to seeing you this Sunday. It's the 17th, and yesterday, a YouGov poll went out to the public. We took that poll today on St. Patrick's Day. And we looked at it because it was quite curious. Now, the poll, which is a YouGov poll on how big of a problem do you think poverty is in the United States? It's an interesting question because no one's really asking that. Overall, to the best of our knowledge, no one in the United States has been questioning or asking about poverty. It's not something that's been presented by the Biden-Harris administration. It's not something that's being promoted by candidates looking to be elected in the 2022 midterm elections. It's just not a discussion at this moment. Inflation, the U.S. economy, the impact of the pandemic on supply chains, the impact of Russia and energy and oil. These are conversations that the world are having, but the question about poverty, not so much. And so we found it quite interesting that on March 16th, the YouGov poll came out. But it's funny because that poll was also matched by news that came out from major news media all across the world. From The Guardian, from Syracuse.com, The Hill, San Antonio Report, Scientific American, The Grio. So suddenly, and all at the same time, we saw an emphasis across the globe, and specifically in the United States, on poverty. And at the same time that those reports came out, the YouGov poll on poverty came out. That seems like very interesting coincidental timing, which we've seen often with the YouGov polls, almost as if they knew the news articles that were going to come out, and they put out their poll ahead of that news as a confirmation bias. Now, that may be correct or not, but we wanted to look at this, and we looked at the poll because it had some very interesting data. In looking at the poll, about 59% of those taking the poll said that poverty is a big problem. Now, this is not an official national poll, although you may see some of the results from this being quoted by YouGov to present a position in the United States, which very often for YouGov supports a democratic progressive ideology. We see that often. There are many questions in this poll, and again, many people think this is important, but one of the biggest questions that were presented in the poll that we think are important is that compared to 5 years ago, do you think it's easier or harder for people to escape poverty? 70% of respondents said it's harder. That's an important thing. It is harder today in 2022 under the Biden-Harris administration for over a year for those people in poverty to get out of poverty. This is after the American Families Plan. This is after the changes to the American economy. This is after the struggles with all of the debt spending that we have seen from the Biden administration, which has helped to increase inflation. The average person, at least on YouGov, are saying, no, this is really much worse than what we had previously under the Trump administration, where we had low unemployment, we had low inflation, and the economy was moving ahead very strongly. Well, a lot's changed in the last 5 years. In particular, of course, is the pandemic, but also the geopolitical situation. Now, of note, in the poll, who holds the most responsibility for getting people out of poverty? The answer in the poll is 46% of respondents believe it is the government's responsibility to get people out of poverty. That's an important thing to keep in mind. The number one answer is the government at 46%. 44% believe it is people living in poverty. It's their responsibility to get themselves out because you are responsible for your own life. But that also goes in line with this prior question. Who do you think is the most to blame for people living in poverty in the United States? 59%, a majority, a significant majority of those taking this poll believe it's the government, it's the actions of the Biden-Harris administration and their economic policies. That is the reason why people are more in poverty today than 5 years ago. So we can understand why they would say, well, it's the government's fault. If the government got you into poverty, then it's the government's responsibility to get you out of poverty. But the government doesn't really work like that. As we have seen, and you can say this about Republicans as well as Democrats, the government is more, at least in recent decades, the government is more about complaining about a problem than resolving that problem. It's more about learning to live with the problem than to fix the problem. And we can look at many issues, and we have over the years, of all of the proposals we hear. And just as an immediate example, Article 230. Everyone admits and everyone understands there is a problem with the internet overlords and their control and their disregard for free speech. And everyone acknowledges that. And yet, no government, whether it's Republican-led or Democrat-led, there has been no action. Lots of talk, lots of congressional hearings, zero action. Nothing has changed. That's just one example of something that's not groundbreaking, but important. Another point that was very interesting in this poll was when people were asked, how committed do you think the Biden-Harris administration is to reducing poverty? Well, the answer overwhelmingly is 47% of respondents said not seriously at all. That's interesting. So people don't believe Biden cares about people who are poor in America. That's really stunning, although it's not that surprising, because the Biden-Harris administration is not known for its empathy or its concern for American citizens. Just look at how many Americans have been left in Afghanistan. 9,800, 247. We have no idea. The number keeps changing. The only thing we know for sure is that there are Americans still in Afghanistan abandoned by the American government under the orders of the Biden-Harris administration, and that number of Americans is unknown at this time. That's it. And we know that the Biden-Harris administration went on NBC to tell Lester Holt that Americans in the Ukraine were also abandoned, that no help and no hope from the United States government would be reaching them, even if children were being bombed incidentally, accidentally, or targeted by either the Russian or Ukrainian forces. So the Biden-Harris administration isn't known for empathy. So it's not to be surprising that 47% of people believe that the Biden-Harris administration is not serious about reducing poverty. In fact, only 19% believe that the Biden-Harris administration is very serious. Well, let's move on. Because the big question that really prompted us to stop our preparations for our interview with Matt Braynard, the executive director of Look Ahead America, which one of the following measures do you think would have the most impact in helping to lift people out of poverty? That's a really important question. How do you help people to move forward, to move upward in both economy, the socioeconomic ranks and rungs? How do we get people to be in a better quality of life? The answers will surprise you. Now, the choices provided by YouGov: affordable housing, increased minimum wage, job fairs, free or discounted education, more job centers, food banks, free discounted health care, increased threshold of the income tax and national insurance, shelters, fundraising. This is a list of the progressive agenda. It has nothing to do with actually helping people to improve their lives. And that's the funny thing. That makes this poll biased and ineffective. It's not offering anyone anything. It's not even looking at this in a serious manner. This is a propaganda piece. And that really upset me. Because again, let's look at this. So the question is, what would have the most impact to take people out of poverty? Now, affordable housing is a question, yes, that can help people out of poverty, but it doesn't really answer the question, why are people in poverty? Because you have to answer that question first to best help people to not be in poverty. But the poll isn't looking for that. The poll is looking for a quick fix. It's looking for a political answer. So you say affordable housing. Yes, that is important for the money that you have, but that doesn't make you less poor. That just means that the limited funds that you have will not be allocated as much to your housing. That doesn't make you richer. That doesn't make you less poor. That just changes what you're spending the money on. So affordable housing really isn't an answer because it really doesn't address the problem. The problem being a lack of funds. What is most impact in lifting you out of poverty? How about increasing the minimum wage? Well, that's, again, another talking point from the far left, the progressive ideology. We've heard that from Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, among others. Except it's not an answer. As we have covered on this program, both times that this issue has been addressed by the Congressional Budget Office, we have seen that the answer is increasing the minimum wage, especially to $15 an hour, actually increases the number of people who will be in poverty. It actually increases the number of people who will be unemployed. In addition, the individuals who get paid the minimum wage, most people are not aware of this, but according to all government data, that's only about 3% of the entire working population in the United States. 97% of people working in the United States get paid more than the minimum wage. So you're really not helping the majority of people who are poor because, one, the cost of living goes up for those same poor people. Two, it doesn't actually improve their situation. You're not lifting them out of poverty. You're just changing the level that poverty is at. And this is not even taking into account the increase in inflation, which is an entirely separate issue, but yet also is a factor in people's poverty and the quality of their lives. How about job fairs? Do job fairs help get people out of poverty? Not exactly. See, job fairs mean you can go and apply for a job. It doesn't give you a job. It doesn't give you a better job. It just gives you the opportunity to ask for a job. And we have, throughout this nation, many, many job fairs. And in every county in this nation, you have state-run organizations to help promote job fairs on a regular basis. Free or discounted education and training for adults. Well, that could help, but that's assuming that the adults aren't able to work in the industry that they should be working in. Take, for example, manufacturing. There are 5 million less manufacturing jobs today than there were in the year 2000. So people who were skilled workers, perhaps making $25, $30, $40, working in factories, to be able to build and manufacture the goods that we use. When America transitioned under the Obama administration from a manufacturing economy into a service economy, those jobs disappeared. So those individuals might need to be trained. But their cause of poverty isn't because they aren't skilled workers. It's because the jobs they're skilled at don't exist. So again, it goes back to a question of jobs, not skill. Many of these people are skilled. That's why they're going for education and training. Many of these people have skills. The skills they have don't have a job to be able to be applied to. The problem is, again, going to the job, not that individual. Well, let's think of it from the other way. We're training people to be more service-oriented, to write code, as an example, to work with software. Well, that creates a glut. We're now creating more people chasing the same limited number of jobs, which means there are still people who are going to be unemployed and in poverty because there's still the same number of jobs. Let's say it's 1,000 in the United States, and you have 5,000 people who have been retrained for that job. There's only 1,000 positions. 4,000 people remain out of work. You're not helping the majority of people. What you need is to create more businesses. You need more small mom and pop jobs so that people would be able to then take those positions. So overall, and food bank. The food bank doesn't improve people's poverty. Again, you're addressing how people spend money, not the money that they have. Discounted healthcare, how people are spending money, not the money that they have. So, and fundraising makes no sense whatsoever. That's just charity. Charity already exists. Charity doesn't lift people out of poverty. If you got a charitable donation, much like if you got an income tax break of $5,000, that's a one-time event. And then what happens when that money runs out? What do you do next? So this really threw me off. And so the poll wanted to say, remember, these are unweighted. This is not reliable, except they use these questions and these answers to then put out reports to the public saying, well, here's what we see people saying. They're not promoting solutions. The number one solution to be able to help people to lift them out of poverty is to allow them to have a job, to have skill at that job. We need more jobs and those businesses, those small businesses, to grow for people to have the upward mobility to get themselves out of poverty. That is the solution, which you may say involves education to some extent, fair enough, but the main thing is the work, having the practical application. So that's a very big thing. So this poll threw us off, and so we wanted to look at this. How is poverty going on in America? How is this affecting people? Well, we saw under the Obama administration, we had a peak of 15.9. in 2012, after the summer of recovery, after the Obama stimulus, after Obamacare, the United States had 15.9% of its population in poverty. And then we saw that number decrease as America got further and further away from the recession of 2008, 2009, and was continued in the Trump administration. We saw the economy improve. We saw it significantly improve in the Trump administration. That's just factually correct. And we saw poverty decrease. Now, the data ends on January 1st of 2020. So we know that at that time, January of 2020, before the pandemic, we knew that the U.S. annual poverty rate was 11.9%, a strong and significant improvement. So why are there so many articles that are coming out talking about child poverty, about poverty being worse than anyone else? Well, we decided to go to the Census Bureau to see if they had any insight on this, and going from 2019 to see what they had to say about it so that we can compare and see where we are today. And the answer is the official poverty rate in 2019 was 10.5%, down 1.3 percentage points from 11.8% in 2018. That was the fifth consecutive annual decline in poverty. Since 2014, the poverty rate fell 4.3%. But something doesn't make sense here. According to the St. Louis Federal Reserve, otherwise known as the Fed, the data from the United States, we were at 15% and we went down to 11.9%. Why is it that the St. Louis Fed, the Federal Reserve, it has a different number than what we see with the United States Census? Well, maybe that was an aberration in 2019. Maybe the numbers were just off. If we look at 2020, and again, this is from the United States Census, published on September 14th of 2021. And what we see is the official poverty rate in 2020 was 11.4%, up 1% from the point of 10.5% in 2019. This is the first increase in poverty after 5 consecutive annual declines. So we saw an increase in poverty. Well, that kind of makes sense. We had the pandemic. 22 million people were not able to go to work. Everything was shut down, not just in the United States, but globally. Everything shut down. People didn't have income streams anymore. Businesses shut their doors forever. I know that personally. The business that I worked at, 9 to 5, shut down in June of 2020 forever. Those doors do not exist anymore. That business is non-existent. And my position with that company also went away because they closed. So many people went through that same process. So we're not surprised that we see poverty go up, especially that it would and the good news is it only went up by 1 percentage point. That's pretty great news. But again, that doesn't seem to match what we're seeing from the U.S., from the Federal Reserve. The data isn't complete. And looking at 2021, where we saw that inflation has gone up significantly, skyrocketing, literally skyrocketing throughout 2021, we can only imagine how much poverty has increased as the buying power of American citizens has decreased. Something that, again, in the USA poll is not being addressed whatsoever. Your money is worth less than it was a year ago. Your buying power is less, which makes your poverty deeper. Well, we had to go and we decided to look at what PBS had to say about this. And this is from December 22nd of 2021. What happened to poverty in America? And what we see from PBS is something that's very interesting. Zachary Parolin has been leading Columbia University's researchers monthly estimates of U.S. poverty since the start of the pandemic. According to the team's data, the poverty rate in December 2020, when many pandemic-related benefits expired, was 16.1%. But when some benefits were renewed or extended in January 2021, the monthly poverty estimate declined to 13.2%. Let me go on. Quote, in fact, throughout the entire year of 2021, the poverty rate has been lower than the 16.1% that we saw in December of 2020. The Columbia team estimated that poverty in 2021 rose to a high of 14.3% in February and declined to 9.3%, its lowest level of the year, in March, when families received economic impact payments as well as income tax and child tax credits. Let's stop for a second. What was inflation in 2021? They don't tell us. This article from PBS omits an essential key piece of data. What is, either monthly or annually, the inflation rate for the poverty, what is the poverty rate in the United States in 2021? They tell us that for a month, just 1 month, December of 2020, it was 16.1%. Okay, and then it went to 13.2%. Fine. In February, it went to 14.3%. And then the very next month, it was at 9.3%. These are radical changes in the amount of poverty in the United States on a monthly basis. They're literally saying that in 3 months' time, 4 months' time, we saw the inflation in the United States go from 16% to 9%. That's a 7% change at the same time that inflation was increasing in the United States. What happened? And what was the final result? Which they do not provide. So PBS is very strategically trying to target a certain mindset to make you believe that you're better off today than you were last year, but they don't want to give you any data to actually confirm that. They just want you to have that impression. And that is a bias. And we see that bias throughout the article as it's telling us that the American Rescue Plan was a significant benefit and that it was keeping child poverty lower. Except we don't know that because you haven't given us the data. You're giving us a summation and a reason for why you allege that children were better off and why poverty was lower without actually telling us what was the poverty rate and what's the comparison so that we can make a real comparison. They're playing with the numbers and they're not giving you a real answer. We even looked at this. We went to the 2021 poverty projections assessing the impact of benefits and stimulus measures, July 28th of 2021. And in this, we see that the America Rescue Plan is also being championed. Do you notice there's a trend here? News media and academics are trying to tell you how great the Biden-Harris administration is. Even though we see today they've failed. The economy in the United States is worse off and projected to become worse off than where we were a year ago, especially in comparison to 2 years ago when we didn't have a pandemic to have to compare it to. We see them say that the 2021 annual poverty rate was 8.7%, and they project that it's going to go to 7% before the end of the year. Well, these numbers are nowhere in line with the numbers that we have seen from the St. Louis Fed, the Federal Reserve, nor is it in line with anything we're seeing from the Census Bureau itself. Where are they getting these numbers from to be able to say it's so much better? At 8.7%, that's even better than what PBS is telling us that was being recorded by the University of Columbia, and what they had said. The Columbia University Center on Poverty and Social Policy, which is, and at the nonprofit Urban Institute. So the Urban Institute is part of the data that's being quoted by PBS. And the number they're coming up with, which was 9.3%, the lowest level of the year in March, but yet they also have, and that's a report that came out in December, but yet the report they had in July tells us that it was 8.7% and 7.7%. These are numbers that PBS in December doesn't exist. These numbers don't make sense. It would seem that there are individuals who are arbitrarily putting together their own numbers and their own data sets based on their own criteria to be able to prop up a political ideology. And we keep seeing this mentioned with the American Families Plan, a democratic ideology, an ideology that's being supported by the YouGov polling, which means that you are getting misrepresented. The information, you're getting misinformation that doesn't correlate with any other data that we can find. But we want to ask the question, why is all of this coming up now? Why is this subject even coming up? Why are all these various news media organizations targeting this question right now? We're seeing this even from The Hill. Anti-poverty programs fail to address the black-white gap in child poverty rates, according to a study. This is March 16th of 2022. And in that, we see this. They found that programs targeted for families already living in poverty, called in-kind benefits, like housing subsidies and food stamps, were found to significantly improve Black children's income-to-needs ratio. For example, researchers found that housing subsidies increased the income needs ratio of Black children living in poverty by 25%, as opposed to 6.7% for white children. Okay. However, programs like food stamps and housing subsidies are specifically targeted where families can only spend those dollars on specific items or services. They can create undue limitations for families, according to the co-director, Christopher Weimer, co-director of CPSP. Quote, he says, "We treated $1 of food stamps equivalent to $1 cash in this poverty measurement framework, but you can't do anything with food stamps other than buy food. So you're in a jam if you need to buy diapers or pay a utility bill, then we know that you can't use your food stamps to help out with that. On the other hand, cash benefits and tax credits, like the child tax credit and Social Security, are considered straight cash that do not hold spending requirements. These types of social programs were found to disproportionately help white children in their income-to-needs ratio at 80%. Black children's income-to-needs ratio only improved about 37%. Now, researchers noted that children of color are considered more likely to live in multi-generational homes that benefit from Social Security, but Black recipients, on average, receive $2,330 less in annual Social Security than white recipients. That difference can trickle down and eventually influence whether a child is considered to be living in poverty or not. So, first of all, we're getting yet another new data set about poverty, child poverty, which doesn't match the numbers that we see for poverty in the United States, or the numbers from the census, or the numbers that are being provided by PBS and certain perhaps biased or academic agencies. So we're getting yet another set of criteria that changes the bar and shifts everything. Because child poverty isn't adult poverty, two different numbers. And now they're trying to break it out by the race of the individual. But here's the question that I would have in looking at this. Food stamps is not the same as direct cash, and we should be giving people more child tax credits and Social Security. We should be giving people more direct payments. Well, Social Security is a benefit based on what you worked for. What you put in is what you're able to take out. So if you put in less, you receive less. So the problem isn't so much that Blacks are getting less in Social Security than whites. The problem, because they put in less than whites. So you're going to get less if you put in less. What we should be addressing is, well, why are they not having the same job opportunities? What is the difference in the jobs? Is it based on education? Is it based on what's available, transportation? What's the difference? There's your question. And that, of course, affects children, so we can understand that. But food stamps aren't supposed to be meant to pay for utility bills. They're meant to pay for food, to make sure that children won't go hungry. That's the whole point. So when we see that they're saying, well, it's not the same as having cash on hand, you're right. Also, we have to wonder, how are people spending money? Because if we're seeing people get direct cash payments and they're saying that that's more important, well, where are people spending that money? Especially since we see such a discrepancy, and that's a big question. There is no real answer to that, though. But I kept wondering, why is there so many differences, not just in poverty, but also in child poverty? Why do none of these numbers match up? Why is everyone coming up with their own data set and their own changes, saying that and making the accusations that, the American family plans and the Biden-Harris administration have helped American families, even though the U.S. economy shows us that's not the case, that Americans have less income and they have less funds available to spend, and therefore the most poor are the most disadvantaged. This doesn't make sense. Well, I found an answer, and the answer is, and this comes from, and I want you to see, this comes from the definition of child poverty, a discussion of concepts and measurements. This is coming from UNICEF. And in their discussion, we see that they define child poverty. Quote, there is no uniform approach to defining, identifying, or measuring poverty. The debate over poverty is concerned with different potential causes of poverty and ways in which poverty can be measured and compared nationally and internationally. The monetary approach, which is the most widely used approach to identify and measure poverty, focuses on poverty reduction strategies on increasing individuals' incomes. That seems to make sense. If you have more money, you're able to afford more of the things you need, and you have more wealth. Therefore, that ends poverty. Makes sense. Going on, notwithstanding the widespread use of monetary approach, several development organizations see poverty as a phenomenon that cannot be defined only in monetary terms. Really? You define poverty as something other than not having the money you need? Okay. They recognize that poverty is multifaceted and cannot be measured and resolved only through monetary means. In particular, organizations that work on child poverty issues view poverty as a multifaceted problem that requires comprehensive strategies to address these many features. So it's about being your race, it's about where you live, it's about your education. Yes, so that's poverty. If you don't have the right education, you're poor. If you don't live in the right neighborhood, you're poor. Well, aren't those functions of wealth? If you have more wealth, you can live in a different neighborhood. If you have more wealth, you can get more education. If you have more wealth, you're less likely to be addicted to drugs. If you have more wealth, you have generally we find a correlation between wealth and families. You have a more stable family structure if you have more wealth. These things tend to happen. Now, is that absolute? No. But it always comes back to the same thing. So again, we look at this. Affordable housing, increasing the minimum wage, but that's not the answer. It's the job itself. If you have a better job, you get a better income, which then allows you to have a better education, especially for your children. You're able to feed them better. You're able to give them a more stable environment. It's the better job. That's the net result. And that is equated by having a better income. not artificially made, but something that is earned. There's a big difference there. The thing that I find as a through line, though, is that these articles are coming out right now. Why now? Well, we have inflation at 7.9% and it's going higher. We know that oil and gas prices have continued to go up since February of 2021 under the Biden-Harris administration, and that the impact we're seeing in terms of energy costs, in terms of gasoline, heating, in terms of businesses, these costs are going up for every American and every business in America, and that isn't at its peak yet. That is continuing to increase, and therefore our prices, our inflation is increasing. At the same time, the Biden administration is spending more money than we have seen almost ever. It's like a drunken sailors. The Navy, if it were drunk and spending money, can't spend money as fast as the Biden-Harris administration has been spending, which is devaluing our money. Literally, your money was worth less today than it was 1 year ago, than it was 2 years ago. And that's because we printed we spent $7 trillion that we don't have. And taking advice from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Andrew Yang and the Democrat leadership, we just printed more, which made your money worth less. Again, increasing and contributing to the 7.9% inflation. And that's something that's continuing to move forward as we see the $2 trillion Build Back Better bill, which is maybe the name of it keeps changing, but it's the Build Back Better bill that was rejected by Democratic senators that they're trying to push forward that will hurt you even more, having spent even more money that we do not have, devaluing your dollars and increasing inflation even a higher rate. But the Biden-Harris administration needs help. They need a victory. They need something to say that they can win on. It's in terms of their international policy, they have lost at every single turn. Again, Afghanistan, look at Iraq, look at Iran, look at Taiwan and China, look at, of course, Ukraine and Russia. At every turn on the international policy, we have had complete failure. On domestic policy, we have seen nothing but failure. There is no bright spot to point out, because if there was, the Biden-Harris administration would be cheering it and championing it on the top of their lungs, and CNN, MSNBC, the far left news media would be promoting it nonstop to be able to help assuage the landslide of losses that are expected in the 2022 midterm election. But that's not happening. It doesn't exist. But we have been seeing a serious shift in the Biden-Harris administration trying to target different issues all the time, trying to find something to say this is good. Now we have poverty. And it seems that there is a consensus of news media all talking about child poverty and saying that it's better without giving you real data on that, but saying, well, it's better, and it's better because of the Biden-Harris administration, when we have no evidence of that, and all evidence in our economy says that's not true. And that's what the YouGov poll is about. It's about pushing a message. They want to convince you of something that isn't true, that won't have the impact they want you to think it will. And that's political. That's why they're pushing a political agenda. I don't know the exact answer on child poverty because, according to UNICEF, no one can know. The numbers are apparently arbitrary, and depending on which source you go to, you'll get a different set of numbers that may or may not give you an accurate answer and may or may not match your political ideology. But what I do know is it seems to be very unfair, and the bias, the misinformation that is being placed out there seems to have a very singular political objective. But they want you to believe that the Biden-Harris administration cares about you. And when we look at it internationally or even domestically, we don't see evidence of that. What we do see is an emphasis on elections, on getting a result that is better than what is being projected at this moment. The American people overwhelmingly reject the Biden-Harris administration. Both the approval rating for Joe Biden and for Kamala Harris are miserable and going lower. The results that we see, the impression of Americans about the economy is decreasing. The confidence just isn't there. The cost for American consumers is increasing, and there is no end in sight in the near term. We have problems. But maybe we have it wrong. Maybe we're just misunderstanding, and it's just a coincidence that the YouGov poll comes out at exactly the same time as the several sets of data from different organizations, news media organizations, most of them leaning to the left, and that it's just a coincidence that this all data seems to be trying to say that the American Families Plan, the Biden-Harris administration, have done better than all other objective data seems to show. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Maybe we've misunderstood. We like to hear what you think. Does this make sense to you? Do you feel like the economy is better? Do you feel like poverty is growing or decreasing for you and for children? Do you think that the answer to poverty is increasing the minimum wage or increasing the number of jobs and the quality of the jobs, and to expand small businesses? Which one do you think will be more effective? And do you think the Biden-Harris administration is prioritizing one of those two solutions? Let me ask you, why? Whatever you may think, we look forward to seeing your comments, and we look forward to hearing you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in our live stream. And we hope that you'll also be able to see our video later today, our interview with Matt Braynard of the Look Ahead America, which we think will be very exciting. We thank you for your time. Again, it's St. Patrick's Day. Be safe, and we look forward to talking to you soon.